Hey everyone, welcome to CIS 5221. I am Carl Morris, your instructor for the next 4 months. You can just call me Carl, that's fine. Um, what I'm going to do is take the next few minutes and just kind of give you a general overview of this course, sort of what you can expect, what we're going to cover. Um, Expectations of you and just basic operating procedures to make sure that we're all on the same page as we get into this this course. So again, this is CAS 5221 Introduction to Mobile Application Development. The name of the course is sometimes a little misleading to some students, even though it has the word introduction in it. You should not think of the course in terms of that word because it is can be misleading to some folks depending on how you sort of internalize it. Instead, think of it as the course that has as its prerequisite a series of programming courses, including data structures. Um, we're introducing you to the idea of mobile application development, but I like to tell folks that this is a course that has a lot of programming, but it is not a programming course. What I mean by that is, while yes, you'll be writing a lot of code to complete your projects and work through activities that might come up in say, your lesson videos, we're not really teaching coding, with the exception of the first few lessons where we're kind of introducing you to this programming language that we use. What we're really focused on is design principles, um, or design patterns is would be the technical term. The idea being, we're building mobile applications. It's a new paradigm. It's a new platform. Certain frameworks will try to accomplish certain tasks in certain ways. You're oftentimes not writing code from scratch. What you are doing, because it's a framework, is you're taking modules that pre-existing, and your code is simply used to bring these modules together, to coordinate, tie them together, and pass information in the right ways at the right time to the right recipient. And that's how you get the results that you will need. Um, it's my hope that you will take away from this course principles. So, introduction to mobile application development. The idea being there are lots of mobile platforms out there, two major ones. But if you include the web and then cross-platform tools and all of that, then you have quite a few different platforms. Um, so we'd like you to think of it in terms of taking away principles, but ultimately we have to implement on a fixed platform, a concrete platform, and for us, that platform is Android. Android was chosen because it is deemed to be a little more accessible. You can do development on any platform, and whenever you were required to test on a physical device, which is not a requirement for this course, but if you were called upon in any other context, you can acquire devices for relatively relatively cheap uh, acquisition costs. So that's our platform. So we'll be learning Android development and the associated programming language called Kotlin. So, as I mentioned, this is not a programming course. We're not going to be focused on a language, but we will take some time in the beginning to introduce you to this new language. You would have had some experience at this by this time with Java. There is a one-to-one mapping in terms of capabilities for what we want. Perhaps at some low level, it's not one-to-one. For what we're looking at, for what we're doing in Android, is a one-to-one. So any concept that you would have done thus far in Java, you can map it pretty succinctly to Kotlin to a point where you should be able to get up and running very quickly. Semantics are pretty similar, only the syntax changes. I was going to say slightly, but maybe that's not true. There are differences, but differences that we can easily appreciate and understand. So again, we'll get some practice with that in the first couple of weeks, and then after that, we'll actual Android development. So let's just dive into the looking at the syllabus, and then we'll talk a bit more about some of the expectations of the course. So, as mentioned, Introduction to Mobile Application Development, CIS 5221. Here is my email. And of course, you can just message me on Canvas directly as well. That'll work. Yes, our course is online, but I am physically present on campus on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then arbitrarily during the week, depending on what else is happening. Um, and you can find me in CERC 327. So that's a science, education, and research, I guess. Office hours are Tuesdays and Wednesdays, 12:30 to 1:30 p.m. And for all of my students, but certainly for the students in 5221, this part is perhaps more important, or by appointment. Recognizing that you may not be able to meet me during my prescribed office hours time, that's not a constraint, that's not a problem. Just send me an email and we can arrange to meet at a different time where our availabilities overlap. So you want to send an email. In fact, even if you can meet me during, Tuesdays and Wednesdays, 12:30 to 1:30, it is still advised that you send an email for a couple of reasons. First, I haven't tested this recently, but the last time I tested this, Zoom will not let me simply sit in a meeting by myself. It would end the meeting and unceremoniously throw me out of the room. Now, because of that, even during office hours, I don't sign into Zoom unless I know somebody's going to meet me there. So even if you're coming or you're gonna join me during the regular time, still send an email to let me know you're coming so that I can jump on. Because there are times, especially early in the semester, where even though I don't recommend it, weeks will pass where there are no students coming to office hours. So again, I encourage students to utilize the office hours as early and as often as you can. But I acknowledge the realities that we live in. The second reason why I want folks to do this is I don't want you to wait. So unlike early in the semester where folks may not be utilizing office hours, that tends to get flipped on its head later in the semester. And in that regard, I wouldn't want you showing up at 12:30 only to be seen at 1:20. I wouldn't want you sitting around waiting for that long unnecessarily. So what I ask students to do is to send me an email, and then I will give you a time slot where I currently have no students scheduled, or very few students, or however we rank that. So instead of showing up at 12:30 and waiting, maybe you show up at 1:15, and you only have to wait a few minutes before we can speak. So again, even if you're coming on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, send me an email so that I can anticipate you. If you're physically visiting me, then it wouldn't matter. At least on Tuesdays. On Wednesdays, it is strictly online. All the prior rules up. Here's the URL. This will be posted on Canvas, so don't worry about it. We don't have a textbook in this course. We don't have a textbook simply because everything in Android, the API, the language, the IDE, everything changes so frequently that your textbook would become a paperweight in months, if not weeks, after purchasing it. It's just not viable for us. Instead, what we do is we rely on certain online resources. Perhaps the most important one is the developer guide. So this is where Google actually publishes their documentation, but not just technical documentation. In fact, it's pretty much everything. It's tutorials, it is descriptions, it is the same kind of things that you might find in some textbooks. You can find it on the developer guide. So whether you want to do your own reading or a given topic on Canvas, and I probably need to spend a minute talking about how we set up Canvas, but after this, I might put a link to additional reading, which basically says, for a topic we just covered, here is where you can go and see more context, more examples, more information than we might have covered in the video. So keep this in mind. Stack Overflow. This is listed only because, for a couple of reasons. First, many years ago, Android made the determination that Stack Overflow would be the official support platform, which means that when you Google a problem in Android, you copy an error message, for example, and paste it into your search engine. Oftentimes, the first 3 or 10 results are Stack Overflow pages. That's not just happenstance. That's not by accident. That's because Google made a determination not long ago that that's where they would do their support work. It's been diluted with other platforms over the years, but including Google's own forum. But this is where a lot of the work is, which means that you will oftentimes find answers to questions by the Google engineers sometimes on Stack Overflow from people who write Google textbooks. I mean, Android development textbooks, and there's a lot of brain power here. So you don't even have to go to Stack Overflow. Just do a search, and you will get Stack Overflow links as a result. And this course relies heavily on GitHub for our assignments. So you want to make sure that you get some practice with that. If you don't use GitHub frequently, then you will find I'll post some videos that sort of go through some of the topics that you can watch. You may need to block off a few hours to go through them, but I highly encourage it. This source control, oftentimes on GitHub, but potentially using other platforms, is an extremely popular software development tool and practice. So you'd want to have that experience even if you haven't had it before. So we rely heavily on GitHub for assignments, and definitely check that out. Make sure you have a GitHub username and all of it. Again, this course has some prerequisites. Goal here being to make sure that you've already kind of gotten some software development programming experience under your belt. So now when you come into this course, we can focus on more high-level concepts, not just here's what an imperative programming language is. Here's what object-oriented programming language is. You want to make sure that you already have those concepts covered. It's just high level, some of the stuff that we're covering. What is it that you expect from this course? And it's mobile applications, right? You use a mobile device, you understand some of the principles behind modern mobile apps. We have to understand the interactions, we have to understand the capabilities. We do not go deep into things like sensors in this course. We really just want to understand the framework. So you can think of it as completing this course should allow you to build any transactional app that you might find on a desktop or a website. You should be able to build a similar thing in an Android application. That's where this don't really actually focus on all of those mobile centric features like GPS and using camera. That would be a subsequent course that doesn't exist in this program. And that is what the introduction in this course title actually. We just look at the principles, we look at the framework, we look at sort of how the system works. But that gives us a springboard to even go off and understand and learn about other aspects of the framework once we have this other capabilities under our belt. So we're going to learn about what mobile application development is involved when we do, what's involved when we're talking about Android. We're going to look at code and presentation, that is activities and layouts, and we're going to have a little asterisk here, and I'll come back to that in a second. Android manifest, which is how we declare different aspects of our application. The intent system, which is how applications communicate. The permission model, how we make sure that our application is able to access external resources. Parallelism and concurrency, this is how we can perform parallelism and concurrency. If it's easier for you, you can think of this as multi-threaded development. We'll talk a little bit about threads, but we're actually going to use more recent paradigms, something called coroutine. And we look at addressing using files and data that we can put on the internet. Here again, we say activities and layouts. Maybe we should just scratch that and just say application code and presentation, because Android has in recent years implemented a new UI toolkit. Again, all of this stuff is not going to necessarily register with you right now, but it'll be on in the semester. So layouts and views, the view system is what Android used to use. Now there's something else called Jetpack Compose. In this course, we're going to be introduced to both. This is a judgment call on my part. I don't feel comfortable enough yet to say that the view system is completely it's deprecated in Android by and large, but in terms of what you might come across in the real world, I think there's still a large amount of projects out there that still utilize this system. Working for a company that uses the view system, I wouldn't want you to be lost because I only showed you the new stuff and didn't show you the old stuff. So we're still going to cover some of that, and we'll be introduced to Jetpack Compose, so we understand the new UI framework and how modern applications are built. So the good part of that is we'll know both things. We'll know both approaches for building user interfaces. The downside, of course, is that's a lot more content, but it's helpful at the end. And then over time, just in your own use and as you go through your life as a developer, if you're building applications for Android, you will find fewer and fewer view-based applications. And certainly, if you're starting your own new projects, then you probably will find yourself using like tool. So again, we'll be introduced to all of them. This course has two types of deliverables. We have projects or assignments. You'll have one assignment every week, pretty much, for a total of 10 assignments. For the first 6 or 7 assignments, I'll need to double check, you'll have 1 week to complete them. And then the last 3 or 4, you'll have a week plus. So you may get an extra day or two for each of these assignments because, as you can imagine, the complexity. What's more is that the first 6 assignments, the first 6 projects are more or less discrete. You are building a standalone project. You might be starting from something that existed before, but you are just doing one thing in that application. For the last 4 assignments, you're working on one project in 4 different steps. It's one big app. As a result, the way that the grades are assigned are also going to be reflected in that. Depends on kind of how the complexity of the application is developed or how it progresses. That will determine the grade allotments. We'll hear more about that later on. We're going to have 4 quizzes. That's for so projects are 70%, quizzes will be 30%. So evenly distributed, more or less. This will cover concepts that would have been covered in the lecture videos, even if they were not necessarily covered in an assignment. So not every project is going to be able to test every aspect of the framework, but it might still be important for you to know. And if that is the case, then sure, you may find those concepts showing up in the quizzes. And generally speaking, a quiz will cover all the material between the last quiz and the last set of topics you took before the current quiz. Right? So basically, we're sandwiching all of the course content between quizzes. That's what you can generally expect. We shouldn't be going back to previous quizzes, not necessarily. Or certainly not directly. If I have to go back to some previous topic, it wouldn't be that I'm testing your knowledge on that topic. It would be that the current topic might rely on that prior knowledge in some way. So that's the way you can think of. Grade standard for a lot of simple CIS courses, so I haven't really. And this is not going to make a whole lot of sense, but this is what it is. So maybe right now, what can make sense for us is the first couple of weeks where we'll be looking at object-oriented programming as a refresher. So we're going to use this to do 2 things, sort of revisit some important principles in object-oriented development, simply because these are important concepts to understand to effectively go through this course. But we're also going to use that opportunity as a way to introduce you to the programming language that we will use for Android, which is Kotlin. So we're going to talk about some straightforward principles that we are familiar with, and we're going to learn Kotlin while we're doing that. And then that will allow us to move into Android development and the IDE, but using a language that we practiced before when we were. That's how we're going to start off to make sure that we are, we want a lot of runway so that when we start to dive into Android development, we're not worried about language constructs. Have some familiarity with that point. And then for the remainder, again, it's just topics that will make a lot more sense as we go through the semester. It's really has to be here. And then here you can see the schedule for the assessments. So assessment 1, 4. We're now starting week 1. You may hear me say week, or you may hear me say module. For all intents and purposes, those are the same thing for us. You can think of 1 week as being module. Generally speaking, we will wrap up a topic in a module. Sometimes, at least in one instance, a topic can span multiple weeks. how, if you want to think of that as multiple modules, it really doesn't matter. None of this matters. What matters is that when you sign into Canvas, you will see everything listed chronologically, and you just follow that. So that's what matters. But if it for a mental shortcut, just think of a week as a module. We're going to cover app development in different facets, presentation, logic, communication, all the topics that you saw mentioned above. This is I think this is depending on here it says 15 or 16. This comes down to when our fall break, an ultimate week. So we may have the option there. We'll see how it comes. I think we'll probably do that 16. Student responsibilities, show up, do the work. For us, it just means all the work must be your own. Don't accept late work. There's a reason we don't accept late work. Once the deadline has passed, the solution is going to be released, which means cannot accept an assignment. This is not negotiable. I cannot accept work once I've given out the answer. And you can easily see why I can't do that. So we want to make sure we get a lot of practice with Git and properly committing and submitting our work so that we don't have an issue with late submissions. And I always tell students, if your project isn't working and you're getting close to a deadline, first, that might just be bad time management. We may have to talk about that, but by and large, your best bet is to submit an incomplete but working project versus a closer to complete but failing project. A project that does not run gets a 0. An app that crashes when I use it is a 0. And there's a very straightforward reason for that. I don't measure incorrectness. What I mean by that is if a user submits a project and because of a mistake, if a student submits a project and because of some mistake, put myself on camera for this one just so we're talk to you. So if a student submits a project and it crashes when it starts, right at the beginning, I think a lot of folks might say, well, yeah, that doesn't run at all. So therefore, they should get a 0. But then another student might submit a project where it loads, you click on a button, something happens, and then you click on another button and it crashes then. We don't get in the business of figuring out, well, which one of those is more acceptable. Because ultimately, these are still two projects that crash depending on certain events, which is not in the specification. There'll never be a specification that says your app should crash at this point. So we don't try to find degrees of correctness as it relates to an app that doesn't function. So your best bet, always to submit a functioning app, even if it is incomplete. Not try to force it at the end and then potentially mess something up that causes your application to not run. Again, I will always be here for office hours. Utilize them. Make sure that we're talking. Make sure that I can guide you as best as I can, so that we're submitting good quality work. All right. No cheating. Cheating is designated as anything that is work being submitted that is not your own. You should ensure that however you come to a solution in your mind, and that may come because you've had a conversation with a fellow student, or you did some research online, or, and we'll talk more about this in a second, you utilize AI in some way. Ultimately, when you start to write your solution, it should be your code. That's what we expect, what I expect. If that is not what happens, then we end up with a problem. So please, when in doubt, ask, send an email, come by office hours, let's have a conversation about it. Ultimately, what we're looking for. Now, with generative AI, this course is actually extremely permissive with generative AI. What I ask is that you you use it responsibly. So for us, that means I am asking you to solve the problem to deliver a solution that you built, not one that you delegated to a generative AI system. But that is only insofar as you're building a specific thing that I'm testing you on. Now, here's what I mean by that. Here's an example of responsible use. If I'm asking you to build a project, and for you to build that project successfully, you need to build a queue system, queue or a stack, some other data structure. Well, this is not a data structure course. You would have taken that course already. And I trust you've learned all the concepts and you are comfortable with them. You've gotten that under your belt, that skill under your belt. For you to implement that queue or that stack to build your project, you might feel that that's just menial work. You're not learning anything about queues or stacks in that moment. You just need one that functions to actually solve the real problem you're trying to solve, the Android application. In that regard, using generative AI to say, hey, build me a stack that operates on this type of data, that is perfectly acceptable because I'm not asking you to build a stack. You're building a stack so that you can complete your solution. That is acceptable and responsible use of generative AI in this course. What is irresponsible use is if you copy pasted the whole problem into a generative AI and said, build me this app. That is not acceptable. So you are encouraged to use generative AI as an assistant, that you delegate grunt work to. Like, here, I can't bother to write all of this code or this menial thing that, again, I'm not trying to learn this. I just need the code written. That's perfectly fine. But the thing that we're trying to help you figure out, that's the part you need to write yourself. You need to show that you understood that concept. So again, when you have questions, if there's doubt, reach out. Don't make incorrect assumptions about how to use AI. Ask a question. In fact, I'll add that line. Should have been here already. I think I'll add that section to this. In fact, I think we'll have it. Not an option. So I'll add that to this document. You should see that up there. Yeah. Now, outside of this, again, everything is kind of like it's canvas. This video has run much longer than I anticipated. This course is very cyclic. Whatever we do every week, we will do the next week and the next week and the next week. Watch some videos. We do an assignment, and then every few weeks we take a quiz. That's it. That's the course. So we're not trying to strain your faculties on how we operate here. We try to keep it simple so that your muscle memory can kick in. But I want us to focus on, the thing I want us to learn is proper software design, certainly in the context of Android specifically, and mobile application development, or mobile platform generally. So I think this is going to be a great semester. I look forward to spending the next 4 months going over this material with you, making sure that we're creating the next generation of mobile developers. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out, and good luck this semester. All right, I'll see you.